My name is Tom Vance, and I'm about to give you a rundown on my service life, which was during World War II. And I got into the Air Force, and my lead up to joining the Air Force was rather a strange one. I wanted to be a pilot. And so when it came time to have a medical at the recruiting station, I couldn't pass the eye test to be an air gunner, but I could for a pilot. But my education wasn't up to scratch for pilot training. So I went home. And at the recruiting station, they gave me some things that I could do to sort of strengthen my eyes. And at the time, I had a trucking business, so that was my work. I was trucking. And so as I'm driving along, I'd be glancing off in the distance and making my eyes work. And lo and behold, that did the trick. And so I decided to pack in working after 3 years and go back to school.
Where was home?
And while at school, the government introduced a course for people like myself who've been out of school for a time, and others that maybe didn't have their matric, but they were close. And this course took place up in Hamilton at the old technical school there on Wentworth Street. I guess anybody living in the area might know it. However, I finished the course there. It was 9 weeks. And from there, I moved over to Toronto to the Manning Depot. And of course, Manning Depot was lots of square bashing and physical training and all that kind of stuff. We didn't really get any, what shall we say, lectures or classes of that nature. And after a while, they tried to make room for others coming in, so certain ones got shipped off to aerodromes to perform what they called guard duty. My guard duty was standing at the corner of the horse palace at the exhibition grounds in Toronto. So anyway, time came around and I got transferred up to initial training school, which was up at the Hunt Club in Toronto. I think everybody in the whole country knows about the Hunt Club. And finished my course there, which was still more marching, parades and route marches and so on, and we got quite a bit of classwork there. So this was getting us equipped to move on if you're going into pilot training, or if you're going to be a navigator or a bomb aimer or whatever. So I'm on my way to be a pilot. So I got posted up to Goderich, Ontario, and there was a peacetime airfield there, and all our instructors were civilians, and we had the Tiger Moth. It was quite an interesting place there to fly. It was a grass field, and all our takeoffs used to be almost out over the lake. And of course, it's pretty high elevation of land there, and there was always a pretty strong wind blowing, and you'd take off and you wouldn't get any forward speed. You'd keep climbing, but you weren't going forward until you made a turn. And then whoosh, you came flying around. And, this was all quite interesting when you're learning to fly. However, I finished my course there, and I wanted to get on to Harvard's to be hopefully a fighter pilot. And so I got posted down to Aylmer, Ontario. And of course we're back into all Air Force people there. Our instructors are all from the service. And can't say that I had anything particularly exciting there. I enjoyed the aircraft. We had a satellite airfield, which is now the Crumlin Airport in London. That was our satellite airfield for Aylmer. Our last 2 weeks, I think it was, of our course there, we spent it at up at Crumlin, and from there we got a bit of bombing training, and I'm not sure. I don't think we had any combat training there.
No,
However,
this was on Harvard's.
this was on Harvard's, yeah. And we finished up there, and in those last few weeks of training, we had a visit from a menswear operation in London, and coming out, and he got together with us in one of our billets, and he said, "Well, you boys are going to graduate, and some of you are going to be officers and so on. We'd like the opportunity to supply you with uniforms." So, unbeknownst to me, I guess they must speak to the instructors ahead of time, because they seem to know who to kind of go and talk to. And I was being talked to, but I didn't realize what it was all about. So I end up going on the bus into London. They measure me all up, and I still didn't believe that I was going to become an officer, you see. However, wings parade came up, and when that was over, I had the sergeant's stripes sewn on my tunic. God, when I get back to my billets, here's this uniform that I got all measured up for laid out on my bed. Well, such a crazy thing. However, I guess I was the only one that happened to. However, that's sort of a minor story.
So you had graduated then as a sergeant pilot?
Actually, I guess I graduated as a pilot officer, but I didn't think I was going to be a pilot officer. I thought I was going to be a sergeant pilot, you see.
Do you remember the date of your wings parade?
It was April, approximately the middle of the month. I don't know the exact date.
So the April 1943.
Yeah, I would say that's good. And of course we were sent off on a 2-week leave, and I was on my way to go overseas. And of course Halifax for all the guys at that time.
Is there anything in training that stands out? Your instructors, situations that you might have got into?
Nothing particular. I did have an occasion at one time. Part of my flying training was in this kind of weather at Aylmer. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it was pretty much through. See, I went to service school just right after New Year's, and graduated in April. So then all my flying was winter at Aylmer. But I remember being on a cross country one time. We left Aylmer and I headed down towards, in the direction of Windsor. I can't remember exactly where, but it was a kind of a triangular course. We went down there and then up Borden as another turning point, and then back to Aylmer. But I got involved in my wings icing up, which was a whole new experience for me. I don't think Harvard's had de-icing equipment. However, you're not too smart, really. I just kept flying on. Okay, ice is out there. I guess I'm not going down. I'm still in the air. That was my little experience with icing, but that's the only thing that I can recall that would be of any consequence there.
Did you take to the air naturally?
I would say so, yeah. Yeah, I would say so, yeah. Yeah. It shows up more later on.
Mm-hmm.
And where am I at now?
We're starting to get on our way overseas.
Oh, right, yes. So I finished my 2-week leave before heading off. I'm not sure just how long I spent in Halifax. It seemed to me quite a long time because we had to wait for a boat available. We left Halifax somewhere around the last week of May, because I think I arrived at Liverpool in England that first week in June. We were about six days or 6 nights out at sea on this boat, and we got into Liverpool. I can remember it was very late in the day because by the time we got off the boat it was dark, and directly onto a train. We just off the gangplank straight onto a train. And this was my first experience with blackout. Of course, all the shades were pulled down on the train, and they fed us right away, and oh yeah, we got nicely treated. And one way or another tried to get a little sleep, because when you're moving around in the armed services, there's no such thing as having a bunk to sleep in. You had to kind of make the best of it on those old train seats. Some of them are even wood. But however, we got to Bournemouth, opened the blackout curtains in the morning, and boy, that English countryside just looked like a garden. We went from dismal mud and snow partly gone in Halifax to this in England. Boy, what a change. However, we're into Bournemouth, and it was very nice there. They were very good to us. While I was there, we didn't have any sort of exercises to do. We just kind of mucked about the town, and we got off on a few days leave to a British family, which was very nice. It was away over on along the East Coast, and eventually my posting came along to go to Peterborough, which would be our first taste of flying in England. And we had the Miles Master there, and the Martinet, and the Miles Master is a very nice little airplane with an inline engine, and in fact it was a Merlin, a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, fully aerobatic. I had a very kind of exciting experience when I was there. I'm off with another fellow one day, and just practice flying, nothing special. And we got tempted to do a little low flying. So down I go, and of course over there at that time, nearly all the men who were physically able had to go in the armed service of some type, and somebody had to do the look after the fields and take in the hay and whatever. And they had what was called a women's land army. And here were these girls out working in the fields, and this was kind of duck soup. You go skimming across the field, watching them dive for the haystack. And I made the very awful mistake of writing a letter home to my girlfriend. And this letter got censored. So Thomas Vance gets shipped off to the bad boy school for a little session. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it before, but it was just for people like me and maybe some guy that accidentally, with his finger in the wrong place, he taxis into another airplane and cuts the tail off it or something, and he gets sent there, you know, this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I put in my 2 weeks there. And
where was this? Do you remember?
This was at Sheffield, England.
So you're going up north?
Yeah. And when I came out of there, I was in the greatest physical condition I was ever in my life. Yeah. And I got back to the station. Not too many days went by when I get a posting. And I go to a conversion unit to fly on the Hawker Henley to tow drugs. So that was to Weston-super-Mare down on the Bristol Channel. And from there over to a little place called Aberporth on the west coast of Wales. Mm-hmm. And close to us were stations of Coastal Command. And these Coastal Command units used to patrol the Bay of Biscay and North Atlantic and that kind of stuff. And also on that station we had about 3 hurricanes. And once in a while we'd be called on to do fighter affiliation for the boys on the Coastal Command. They had, what did they have? Sunderlands. Some of them there were some Halifaxes and some Liberators. But my main job, of course, was towing drugs with the Henley, and this would be about a 2-hour exercise in the air.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Henley?
About the Henley?
About the Henley, yes.
Yes. Well, the Henley was a monoplane. I think I would say that a lot of the features of the Typhoon were taken from the Henley. The size of the body, the undercarriage, the size of wheels, and the thick wing root. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you know, a Typhoon was much different than a Henley in that respect. Mm-hmm. A Henley had a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, less powerful than the one they would have in a Hurricane. Mm-hmm. Or maybe not, because Henley was a much heavier aircraft, so maybe that would be the difference. But it was a great old airplane to fly, as long as you were landing on grass fields. On paved runways, it was a wee bit tricky. Don't know why, but it could be a little bit tricky. But however, I did have a kind of a hairy experience one day when I was towing drugs. We didn't have any proper radio contact in flying those things, so the range where the ack guns were parked were about 30 miles up the coast. So our job was to fly up, get the drogue out, which we towed about 1,000 feet behind the aircraft, and you cruised up and down in front of this, what we call the gun park, flew at about 1,000 feet. out so that as this being fired on, the shells would land in the ocean. And the weather started to clamp in, not there so much, but back at our airfield. And of course they had no way of getting through to me to tell me this. So at the end of the exercise, I head back, and the cloud base was getting lower and lower and lower, and we happened to be, our airfield was, I think we were about a 400-foot elevation above the sea. So I get myself out over the sea, and as I look in towards the land, I can see the clouds right on, touching the ground. So as I get up to where I think the airfield is, I know right off the end of at the edge of the field, there was a kind of a ravine that ran right down to the sea. So I thought, I'll fly up that ravine, sneak over the hedge and land. So I still got the drogue behind me, but it's all pulled in close to the aircraft. So as I'm going up this ravine, I could feel that if I don't do something, I'm going to stall. I yelled at the drogue operator to cut the drogue. So I managed to do a turn inside the ravine and kept it airborne, and I got up over gee, it was, Lady Luck was with me there, I think. Got away with that. Anyway, that was one experience I had with drogue towing. Another time,
you're actually, the drogue was being fired at by land-based guns.
Yeah.
40,
I think there were 40 millimeter guns. Yeah. Quite often they would ask, well, it was see, when I got up there, there was enough radio contact that I could talk to, or they could talk to me, or I could talk to them, where the guns were, but I couldn't talk to my base. However, once in a while they would say, "Could you drop the drogue?" And because this would tell them sometimes how accurate their shooting was if there's some holes in it. And I remember one time the American Navy wanted to have a drogue plane fly over one of their, I guess you call them a cruisers. And this was down in the Pembroke Dock area. And so I was relegated to go. And I can remember we got the drogue out, found the ship, and made a pass over the ship. And I swear somebody on the ship must have said fire, and every gun and everything they had fired at the same time, because that drogue just disappeared, just like that. Oh, it was funny. Anyway, that was my little experience there. And around Pembroke Dock, they used to have quite a few gun positions. And with the hurricanes, we used to have to go in and do dummy attacks on these gun positions. And that was another exercise we had to do. Anyway, after about 8 months, I guess they got fed up with me around there and decided to send me off to go to OTU. OTU means Operational Training Unit. And that was up to Curtin Lindsay in Midlands, or sort of near Hull, I know. And I put in my time there. My first airplane there to fly was the Spitfire II, Mark II. And then we had some of our more advanced training there on the Spitfire V. I can't say as I had anything particularly exciting happen to me there. It was pretty routine. We got formation flying, practicing dogfights. We did dive bombing training, air-to-air firing, air-to-ground firing. And I came out of there with pretty good assessment. But it didn't get me what I asked for. I wanted to get put on the Tempest. I had a great yen to want to fly the Tempest, but that didn't happen to come about. I think we were relegated to go to a Canadian squadron, which was good. I mean, I have no regrets. I had good pals on the squadron. Anyway, from Curtin Lindsay, I got transferred down to Tangmere in the south. Tangmere, of course, pretty close to the sea, South Sea, and waited there for a posting over to a squadron. In fact, I guess it was late December when I got down there. I know we had Christmas there, and it was known as a group support unit where the trained pilots were kept, and this is where the replacement aircraft were shipped off from there over to the squadrons. And anyway, I got posted to number 411 squadron, and I remember we left Tangmere in an Anson, and the weather was absolutely foul. We took off immediately into cloud, and I never saw land till that airplane landed at Heath in Holland. I tell you, that guy was pretty good on his navigation, I must say.
And what was the name of the base in Holland?
Heath.
Okay.
It was known as B-88.
B-88, yeah.
Heath, yeah. All our, I think from D-Day, all the stations were known as B, but I kind of think they started right from the small numbers. But as we kept moving on and on, the numbers kept getting higher and higher, you know. And I wish I could remember the numbers, but I do remember Heath being 88. And from yes, while I'm there, I guess I joined there just about a couple of days after New Year's.
Now, was this 44 or 43?
45.
45.
Yeah, we're into January now, 45.
Yeah, 45.
Yeah. And I was on the same squadron as a fellow named Dick Odette. Dick Odette made fighter pilot history, if I may say. He shot down 5 airplanes in one encounter, earned himself an automatic DFC, and he was an unusual guy. I think he would have bypassed Buzz Burling if he'd lived, but he unfortunately got nailed by flak attacking a train. And in his short time with the squadron, I would say maybe he had completed a half to 3/4 of a tour. He had a score of over 10.
What was considered as a tour in a fighter?
About 200 hours.
Yeah.
About 200 hours. 150 to 200. Depended a great deal on the type of tour, I suppose. You know, sometimes guys would have some bad experiences that would probably shorten up the tour a bit. But if everything went smoothly, he might be able to stay longer. Yeah.
Now, with Spitfires, did they talk about shows?
I mean, the type of exercise.
The type of exercise.
Yes. Yes, there were fighter sweeps, armed recce's, rhubarbs. I don't know if you know what a rhubarb is, but it's.
Tell us.
It's a situation where maybe one day weather's not very good, and they're not sending off people as squadron strengths, and one guy is a little bit restless, and he'll talk to his friend, and he said, "What do you say we see if they'll send us off on a rhubarb?" And so what it is, it might be the flight commander, and he'll choose his number 2. He always went in pairs. And he just took off and looked up anything to shoot at. If he could find a train, clobber it. Gasometers, water towers, anything he could do damage. And basically that's what a rhubarb was. And it was all low level. Yeah. Some were successful and some weren't.
This is a way that you young people raised hell, is it?
That's about it. Yeah. Yeah, if the guy got a little bit restless and things were going kind of slow, and nothing like a rhubarb to get the adrenaline going. Yeah. But they weren't really that successful. It was not encouraged a lot, put it that way. Anyway, I'm on the squadron, and yes, I've got to tell you about an experience I had not too long before we had the Rhine crossing, and aircraft would come up for special inspections, and when a major came up, of course, that meant the airplane had to go to the maintenance section and be gone for up to a week, I suppose. Anyway, this particular aircraft came up for a major, and I was asked would I fly it over to the maintenance section, and it so happened that the maintenance section, we were basically starting our move, and the main group, see, we had 5 squadrons on this wing, and so the squadrons basically were still there, but this maintenance section went up forward because they traveled, of course, by truck and all the rest of it to get the equipment there. And so I had to fly the aircraft to there. And as I was landing it up there, I thought the undercarriage didn't seem to be functioning just the way it should. And I didn't particularly mention that because I knew that they went over the aircraft from stem to gudgeon, and so on. So fine, after so many days, I can't remember exactly, it was ready to come back. And I was relegated to go and pick it up. And that, of course, you're flowing, and we had a little Oster on the wing for such things. So anyway, I take off with the aircraft, get it up there, and I thought, well, it's the one occasion that the sky is empty and I'm all by myself. I can do a little playing. So I did some aerobatics, and because when you go out on your ops, you just don't do any of that sort of stuff. So, however, I did. So I come back to the airfield, get in the circuit, select the wheels down. The lever comes down about half position and I can't move it. It's jammed. I can't get it back up again. And however, I go through all the procedures, flew it upside down to get negative G or negative weight on the gears. That didn't loosen up. Did a side slip, and I didn't know what position my wheels were in. And we had a CO2 bottle in the cockpit, which, for emergency purposes, you could engage that thing. And if it was just a case of hydraulics gone or something, the CO2 would drive the wheels down. Anyway, I did that, and of course it didn't make any difference. So I call up the control tower and told them I'm having this trouble. So I said, fly over low and let's have a look. So I fly over the control tower, and they said, you've got your right wheel down and your left wheel is up. And so I had two choices: either climb up and bail out or try and land the aircraft. So I chose to do the landing. So I come around, do my circuit, and came in, and you know something? It was the best damn landing I ever made in my life. Yeah, I came in on that one wheel, touched down, kept the left wing up as long as I could. Speed, of course, was dropping off. The wing was dropping down. And with full right rudder on, see, our braking system was all hooked into the rudders. And to give pressure to the brakes, we had a little lever that you, on the control stick, you pulled on that lever. It's the same as air pressure going into the brakes, you see. So by moving your rudders, you could brake the right wheel or brake the left wheel. So by braking hard on the right wheel, I was keeping the aircraft more or less straight going down the runway. But as I got down to a certain speed, the wing just came down, touched the dirt at the side of the metal. We flew off these metal interlocking things, you know. Spun around like this, eased up on its nose, and there I was. Took all the blades off the prop, took out away the wingtip, but that's the only damage. And you know that the reason that that undercarriage performed the way it did, on the wheels of the undercarriage, it's like a bolt in a door. You know how a bolt is beveled on one side? You know, when you close the door, the bolt pushes back, and then, well, the same principle on the undercarriage. So when you select the lever, what you're really doing is turning that bolt over. So as the bolt turns over, the weight of the wheel against the beveled side of the bolt, it lets go, you see. So what happened in my case, the bolt on the left, I guess, turned completely, or on the right, I guess, could turn completely to allow the wheel to come down, but the bolt on the left wheel only turned halfway, so it didn't release. I got all this afterwards from the engineering officer. He came to me and explained what had happened. Anyway, I got commented on it by the group captain. I have a little note in my logbook.
Do you still have your logbook?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I'll have that, ever. Yeah, as long as it hangs together. It's getting pretty, pages are getting pretty yellow in it now. 65 years now since I flew. Yeah.
Could you take us through a day in the life of a fighter pilot?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's
Holes in your wing?
there was a case one time we were strafing, and the whole time I was on the squadron, I was a wingman, and a wingman, of course, is a number two to a leader. We flew in what we called a finger four formation. We had the CO. We had three sections. The CO led the middle section here, and the flight commanders. We had two flight commanders, so there's one flight commander led this section, the other flight commander this section. And this would be his aircraft, and this would be his wingman. This is number three and his wingman. And I was wingman to the flight commander, I believe it was, this day, and we're strafing this thing at the target. And I can remember we came around in a turn, and I allowed myself to slip a little bit too much behind my leader. And his guns are firing, and the empty shells are come flying, and I ended up flying into his empty shells and put a hole about this big in the leading edge of my wing, and it was. I guess you'd have to say I was fortunate enough that that's the only hole I ever got in my aircraft. No, I never got hit by flak. Yeah.
Take us through a day.
Yes, I got to get back to that.
Normal. I don't know if the word normal comes into play, but a day.
Well, it was a funny. The life of a fighter pilot was rather funny. Some days, not every day, but some days it started pretty early. I was there through the winter months, and the days were long, and we would be up maybe as early as 5 o'clock in the morning, and I think maybe on those shows, yes. Okay, when you get one of those early shunts, we would take off before daylight, and the whole purpose of that was to get yourself over the enemy's airfields to catch them as they're taking off. Surprise strafing, you know. Mm-hmm. And we'd be on an exercise like that. We'd be out for an hour and a half, basically around that length of time. Come back, and then have your breakfast. And maybe your squadron would be on immediate readiness. And that meant you'd have pilots in their aircraft parked at the end of the runway, not with the engines running, but just parked, and there might be something come up that there's a certain target or a certain flight of enemy aircraft spotted in a certain area, and they would be the ones that would get off the ground first. Then there was 15-minute readiness, and then there was I forget, there's about three levels of readiness, and I know the immediate was to be in your aircraft parked at the end of the runway, and then 15 would be you'd be in your barracks or wherever we were, and ready to jump in this 1500 weight, get down to dispersal, get your parachute out, and And if I have to say that I didn't experience the Battle of Britain, but I think pilots during those periods, it was pretty hectic. They might do 2, 3, and maybe 4 shows a day, and they had it pretty rough. But for the most part, I'd have to say I had the easy part of the war. We were certainly the vectors or the victors at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But the life of a pilot, or at least the day of a pilot, was when you weren't flying, there wasn't a heck of a lot to do. You might get a little reading in. You wouldn't go in the mess and get drunk, because that way you wouldn't be able to fly. But however, when nighttime came, the odd guy used to get a little bit oiled up.
Were you allowed to go off base at all?
Not well. The only off base that you might do is I can remember it was the town of Hertogenbosch, right near where we were in Holland. And the odd time we might get a little group of guys together and go over to the pub or something like that there. Well, I would say, other than that, the odd time there might be, a day that the weather was bad, that you couldn't fly. We might put together a truckload and go into Nijmegen, and that would be your only chance to have a proper shower and bath, because we didn't have any facilities like that at all. We had a canvas bucket thing that there was a little 3-legged thing that this canvas bucket would sit in, and that's what you had to wash in. But you didn't get off the station very much.
Mm-hmm. How did the locals treat you?
The locals were good to us. We didn't have much contact with locals. Mm-hmm. In our mess, we had some Dutch girls that used to wait on, serve the food to the tables and clean up and do things like that. We had guys used to come around at night with eggs. We got issued chocolate, unsweetened chocolate, and they came in tins about this deep and about this big around, and it was bars of chocolate. So bitter you couldn't eat the stuff, and the Dutch people just loved to get their hands on it, and we used to deal with them. A bar of chocolate for an egg. And this sort of billet that we were in at Heesh was we took over as a kind of a labor camp, because this billet was a long shell of a building with a kind of a partition that went down the middle, divided it in half. And each side could accommodate the beds, and we'd have a row of beds. Like if this is the middle partition, there'd be a row of beds here, a walkway, and a row of beds there, and that'd be the outside wall there. And a whole squadron could be on this side, because I can remember I was 411, we were on that side, 401 squadron was on the other side of the partition. And speaking of that, it reminds me of a night I was, one of my cohorts was on the other side, on a kind of an angle from me, and beside his bunk was a partition that went up, and he had a guitar, and he used to hang his revolver and a web belt up on the wall. So Bruce has the guitar out one night, and he's strumming along and singing a song, and one of the 401 pilots heard this, and he comes wandering around over and sits on the side of the bunk, and as he's, I think he was kind of oiled up, but he reaches up, pulls the revolver out of the holster, and points it like this and starts firing. Well, Jesus, bullets were ricocheting off the rafters and everything else, and one guy down the way on our squadron got nailed in the leg here, and the bullet came down and lodged at the knee. Well, that was the end of his flying career. He was gone. The guy in the bed next to him, a bullet went into the bed and lodged right almost at his big toe. He didn't get nicked, but a lot of dumb things. And you know, this fellow that did pull the trigger, he was a DFC guy, and he was up for. He got off. He would have been court-martialed normally, but he got off because of his record and so on. Yeah, I won't name names.
No.
But, yeah.
Some people that have flown Spitfires have told us that it's so close in the cockpit that you feel like you're part of the aircraft.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
You're close. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's just, you do this, you hit the sides, you know. Yeah. And I'm not very big.
No.
I sometimes wonder how big fellows manage, but they did.
So over in that area, there would be enemy planes, I would assume, shot down on airfields. Did you ever run into that at all?
Well, let's put it this way. We were certainly on the offensive, and in order to, you had to look for your enemy, and usually our best chances of getting the enemy was to catch them by surprise. If you can get them as they're coming in to land or take off and that sort of stuff. They didn't like Spitfires, let's put it that way. But I don't say it was like that all the time, but it's just the turning of the war actually that brought this about. And I happened to come in on that part of the war, you know.
Did you ever check out any of the abandoned German aircraft? Did you ever run into that situation at all?
Oh yeah. Well, once we got into Germany and we were taking over German airfields, oh yeah, there was lots of ME-109s, Junkers 88s, well, that mostly, and Focke-Wulf 190s. Yeah, I've got pictures of you know, semi-wrecked German airplanes and that kind of stuff.
Never had a chance to fly any, did you?
I didn't personally, no. We had a fellow on our squadron that we had a Junkers 88, and I think it was a case of of that airplane coming in and capitulating, and of course we more or less commandeered it, and he flew it. On another occasion, just almost at the end, we had 5 ME-262s, and that was the German jet. 5 of them came in and gave themselves up on our airfield. Yeah. Hmm.
Must have been a very interesting time near the end of the war.
It was an interesting time. Yeah, yeah. Gosh, I'll never forget the time the day the news came out. The war is over. Whew. The lid flew off, I'll tell you. There was more champagne corks at that station than you couldn't walk anywhere without walking on them.
Now, where would you have been at that time?
Wunstorf. Yeah, we were Wunstorf, and it was sort of almost like the outskirts of Hanover,
Mm-hmm.
which would have more of a, you'd understand Hanover more so than you would Wunstorf.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think there was a little lake there, and it's called Steinhuder Lake, because we used to slip over there and have a little swim in it. Yeah. But after the fighting finished, things were loosened up, and it was a little enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And yet again, there were some fairly hairy. We had an occasion to be fairly close to Belsen concentration camp. We weren't far from it at one point. And going to see that, whew. Yeah. Because you
It's
see,
one of the parts that you don't like to talk about that much, isn't it?
well, what is, you see hundreds of corpses. Well, some of them not exactly corpses, in the process of dying and being pushed around with bulldozers, and they just dug big, huge trenches and just pushed them in there. An awful sight.
One of your friends passed a little note about a Mark 10 and a Mark 16 parachute experiment. With Spitfires?
Mark 10 and a Mark 60.
Oh, Mark 9 and a Mark 16 parachute
Oh.
experiment with Spitfires.
Oh, well, I guess really what that comparison was between the two airplanes. Just shortly after the war ended, we went back to England on what we used to call an air firing course. We'd be gone for about 10 days. And on that, the last one I guess where I was on, they decided to change our aircraft, and we had to drop the 9s off, and we got 16s for replacements. And I guess I've made the comment on occasion when I felt that the 9 was a superior aircraft to the 16. But the 16, it was a beautiful airplane to fly. I think it would be, if you could afford it and so on, that would be one airplane you could have lots of fun with. Yeah, great little airplane. There's a fellow named Potter that has this collection
Down in Ottawa.
down in
Gatineau.
Ottawa, and he has a Spit 16.
Spit 16.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
If you were to sum up your experience, your World War II experience, what would you say? At a boy, what age were you at that time? Now you said you had your own business, so you.
Well, when I turned 16, I figured, I guess I knew all there was to know. I didn't go back to school.
Right.
And I got a trucking business going. So after 3 years in that, I had owned 2 trucks. And what the heck's bringing that up?
Tom, I think we're going to cut it there and put another tape in so we don't lose this part of the story.
Dream about being this fighter pilot, but some people dream about being.
Had to get the bag out.
Okay, I think we were talking before that you, at age of 16, you left school and started your own trucking business. Now was that in Hamilton?
No. This was in the Ottawa Valley.
So home was in the Ottawa Valley.
Yep.
Yeah, remember
Yeah.
we didn't get that at the first.
Yeah.
So you had your own trucking business and you left to go into the forces.
Yeah.
And how would you state your time in the Air Force? What was your feeling about it? Would you do it all over again?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, under the same circumstances, yes, I would. Yeah, I would. I'm not sure I'd want to change anything either. I think I would probably avoid a few things that I got involved in, doing it over again, but no, definitely I would do it over again, yeah.
Now we were, when the first part of the story, I think it was along the line, were you a natural pilot, or how did you feel in an airplane? Was it part of you, I guess?
Well, to get that feeling, to really get that feeling, I would say that came to me after I had time towing drogues. And that all comes with flying experience. I mean, as my hours built up, you know, you're more, gosh, everything just comes so naturally. When I think of how I could fly that old Henley, a lot of people had trouble with it. But Jesus, I could make that thing talk. You know, quite an old airplane. I think that's why I got off to OTU. I think I was doing things around the airfield there. They thought it's time this guy got flying fighter planes.
And as you progressed, the planes were more, I wouldn't say more difficult, but more powerful?
Definitely, yeah. Going from a Spitfire up to a 9, the power is very noticeable. And the big change is going up to a 14. I flew 14s a few hours, and that's a powerful brute. Yeah, that Griffin engine and 5-bladed prop, the torque pressure on that thing was just immense, beyond what I could. Well, I shouldn't say you can control it, but you can't take that airplane up to its maximum until you get it up in the air. On the ground, it would just twist you like that. If you open the throttle fully.
So the takeoff isn't just a straight, even takeoff?
On that 14?
Yeah, on that 14.
No. My takeoffs were rudders as far as I could rudder and stick as far as I could put it, with about half boost. And that's as much as I could control. And if I went any beyond that, it wasn't going to go where I wanted it. Well,
You were saying that the landings in a Spit are different.
Well, yeah, it's different than a Hurricane. I mean, a Hurricane, you can come in on a nice straight approach, you know. Got good vision over the front. Same with the Henley or Harvard, Tiger, you know, they're all the same.
But a Spitfire, you don't take it in that way.
You shouldn't. You shouldn't. If you come in like that, you don't know what you haven't got the same control. I mean, you got to do the proper approach. You got to just curve it all the way, and just straighten out and level out just before your touchdown. A
lot of the we've been told that the over in England that a lot of airplanes going from factory to base or otherwise were flown by female pilots. Did you ever run into any?
I never saw one. Never saw one. However, I was never in the spot where the planes were being delivered. So I know at the group support unit, I'm sure they were all flown in there, and I guess many of them were by women. But I never saw them.
Most of your operational time was over in Europe.
All of it.
All of it was over in Europe. We hear people talk about dogfights. Was there still dogfights in the latter part of the war?
Yes, but not that many, really. Not that many. Yeah. Well, I can think of cases, you know, even though we had everything under control and that sort of stuff, there were still aircraft being shot down, and yeah, I can't.
Did you lose many friends over there?
Well, I wouldn't say. I've certainly lost a lot of friends, period. Up till now, I haven't got very many left of my acquaintances, but we had losses. Yeah, we did. We did. We had a fellow come on our squadron, and he was down twice before he had even 5 hours operation flying. Yeah. Once, I think he got shot down with flak, and then I think he got in bad weather on another occasion. But in both cases, he wasn't captured or taken prisoner. He got back on the squadron. But imagine to go down twice and. Weather was a kind of a menace. Yeah, I know. I'm thinking of a guy named Bill Clearsey. He was the CO of 401 Squadron. In fact, I was on the Anson going when I was joining the squadron. From group support, Clearsey was he was the CO of the support unit, doing his rest tour. And so he took over 401 Squadron, and he finished the war. And he and two other hot pilots, one was Don Lobman, and the other was Chunky Gordon. The three of them decided to go on a little weekend hoot in London, and they each took a Spitfire over. And coming back, they ran into some bad weather, and Clearsey, as I see it, I think he decided to try to get below the weather, whereas the other two climbed above it, and Clearsey flew into a hill. And that's the way that, you know, when you think the guy's completed 2 tours, he had the DSO, DFC, you know, and this guy Odette. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. You wonder where the justice is, eh?
And there were a lot killed in non-combat, were there not? That's what we're just talking about than in actual combat, as you say, to fly into a hill. Or
Well, I wouldn't say a lot killed that way, but it did happen, of course. Yeah. Yeah. The great what's that airplane at Trenton?
Halifax.
Spitfire, the model Spitfire they have, the plastic model.
9, 14, 16.
It's a 9. It's a 9. Chadburn, that's the name I'm trying to think. He was a very accomplished Canadian pilot. He collided, or another guy collided with him on D-Day over the beaches.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the guy that collided with him, he instructed me on night flying on Harvard. He was a bit of a clown. Poor Chadburn. What a way to end it.
Mm-hmm. So your tour ended up over in Germany, and then what, if you can just trace your steps home from then?
Yep. When the word came that the war ended, we were at this Wunstorf near Hanover, and we moved up to another airfield called Fosburg. Fosburg that was the one that was fairly close to the Belsen concentration camp, and I've forgotten now. I have it all in my logbook how long we were there. And from Fosburg we went up to Utersen, which is north of Hamburg, and it's just you know where the land sort of comes up, where the Kiel Canal cuts through it. What do they call that jut of land? It's not Denmark, or it's pretty close to Denmark. Anyway, that's the last station I was on with 411 Squadron. By the way, when we were at Fosburg, somebody got the brainy idea to do a fly past, and Churchill, Roosevelt, and I think the Russian Stalin were together at Copenhagen, and they rounded up, I think, every fighter squadron in Europe, and we did this fly past, and there was the odd casualty in that. Can you imagine? Well, here we were flying. There was 12 of us, and you're stepped down like this, and you're damn close this way, and you're damn close this way. And if anybody's got a little bit of trouble or anything like that, or yeah, one case of a tail got cut off. I think they were Australians, from the language I heard on the radio. Yeah.
So from there, back over to Bournemouth, is that? Or?
From there, I got transferred over to 414 Squadron, which was the Armed Recce, Armed Recce Wing. And it was being disbanded. And we came home on a number system. And that was based on your length of time out of Canada or overseas or whatever. And the way this was done, I guess I just switched with a 414 Squadron. He came on to 411, and I went over there. And went from Utersen, got driven down in a truck. And when I got there, the guys were almost half gone. I remember I had to sleep on a bed with just the springs. There was no mattress or a goddamn thing. And the next day the weather wasn't very good, so they had to get off the station. So we flew up to Lubeck, which is up on the Baltic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had an overnight there, and then headed to England from there. I remember we had to land at Eindhoven to refuel. He couldn't make the trip all the way. We had to refuel there. I can remember my friend Smitty. He blew a tire on landing. He got held up a little bit.
So from Eindhoven over to England.
Eindhoven to Dunsfold, I think it is.
Mhm.
Yeah, we landed at Dunsfold and went right into tents. I had to live in a tent for about 2 weeks then before we got down to Bournemouth. Yeah.
And then back home
And then back home
on the Ile-de-France.
on the Ile-de-France.
Sure.
Yeah.
What time of year would that be?
Oh, what did I think? But around the 1st of October. I remember,
What was waiting for you when you got home?
well, of course, my parents at the train station, and my girlfriend, who we got married very shortly after. I got home then. Got married in January. And this coming January would be 65 years since that took place.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And what work did you go into when you came back?
Actually, I didn't carry on with the trucking business. My father had a general store, and he kind of kept the trucks doing something while I was away. And I think he fully expected I was going to kind of fall back into the fold, but I thought there was an easier way to make a living, so I got into the menswear business
Okay. And that was where?
in Ottawa.
In Ottawa.
So I went to work for a man that had a chain of about 4 stores, and eventually 3 of us bought out the store that I was working in, and then eventually I took over the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I had it on my own for 10 years and sold it. And then I went to work for another menswear operation that had 5 stores, all in Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with them until I was 65, and then decided to do they allowed me to do part-time work for another 10 years till I was 75. Then I moved up to Port Colborne.
I was going to ask what brought you to Port Colborne?
Actually, my daughter was living in Crystal Beach,
Mm-hmm.
and she was the only family. And said, "Dad, look at it. If we want to see more of each other, you got to live closer." So my wife and I thought there was nothing to keep us in Ottawa, so up we came. And since then, I've lost my wife. She died a little over 2 years ago. And I live in an apartment now.
Yeah, we all scale down, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom, I want to thank you for taking part in our Voices from the Past program, but also to thank you for your service to the country. It's very much appreciated.
Oh,
Thank you.
I'm only one of many.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for appreciating it.
Very much. Thank you for coming
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.